We revised our laws, we appropriated state funds, all towards the goal of treating more juveniles in the community and not in prison-like facilities, and intervening in and responding to juvenile misconduct with proportionate, evidence-based services. In the early days of that reform work, those advocates included in their proposal raising the age of juvenile court jurisdiction to 17 in Georgia. Unfortunately, that policy had to be set aside as the proposals went through the legislative process. In the meantime, about a dozen or so other states in the last 10 years have raised their age of juvenile court jurisdiction to 17. Now, we've been back in this Capitol almost every legislative session since those reforms were adopted to remind lawmakers why 17-year-olds who commit crimes should be handled in the juvenile justice system and not in the adult system. Reason number one, 17-year-olds are still kids, and kids are different from adults. They are more susceptible to peer pressure, and the parts of their brains that are responsible for decision-making are still developing. That means that they are not always very good at considering the long-term consequences of their actions, especially when they're under stress and especially when they are with their friends. Now, there's a bright side to that, and that is that young people, 17-year-olds included, have a great capacity to change and grow and rehabilitate. Reason number two, because young people can be rehabilitated and can change and grow, the juvenile justice system is designed to do just that purpose, is designed to rehabilitate young people. A child in the juvenile justice system can have his or her specific needs assessed and addressed holistically, often with involvement from the family when possible. And a juvenile court judge can take a look at the child right in front of them and order restitution for victims or mandatory school attendance or community-based services that will help that child rehabilitate and grow. And we know, not just is that the design or the purpose, the intended purpose of the juvenile justice system, it's what it actually does. The justice system, the juvenile justice system, is effective at rehabilitating youth. We know, studies show us that kids who are adjudicated in the juvenile justice system and not the adult system are far less likely to reoffend, which means our kids are better off and our communities are safer and stronger. Reason number three, in light of all of those things I've already said, raising the age of juvenile court jurisdiction is a smart investment for Georgia. As I've already mentioned, the juvenile justice system is better at dealing with juvenile crime than the adult system. And so that means that's where we should be putting our money. That's where we should be investing our dollars. More importantly, as I already said, kids who are dealt with in the juvenile justice system are able to complete their education and learn and grow from their mistakes and learn new, healthier behaviors and move on to pursue a career without the stigma of a criminal record and return to their communities as full contributing members of their communities. So better for kids, better for our communities, better for our pocketbooks, all of those are the reasons why we should raise the age. Now I'm here to tell you, we're going to spend the bulk of our time this morning talking about Raise the Age. The panelists and other speakers that we've got lined up for you are here to talk about Raise the Age. Continued juvenile justice reform doesn't just mean bringing 17-year-olds into the juvenile court system. It means prohibiting the indiscriminate shackling of children who appear in juvenile court delinquency proceedings. It means responding to youth involvement in gangs in not punitive ways, but evidence-based, supportive ways. And finally, continued juvenile justice reform requires us to recognize that adolescents, like 17-year-olds, even those who do things that make us mad or that scare us, have a great capacity to change and grow and become contributing members of their communities. So that's what we're here to talk about today. I was hoping that by the time I finished up, some of our legislative champions would be joining us in the room. You'll hear from Representative Mary Margaret Oliver and Chairman Mandy Ballinger, who have been our legislative champions on Raise the Age over the years. And you'll also hear from a panel of folks who are going to share the stories of the young people who have been adjudicated in a system designed for adults for crimes that they committed when they were 17, when they were kids. And finally, we might hear from some other experts in the room about how implementation was done in South Carolina and maybe about some of the data that we know about this issue. So a couple of get you caught up while we're still waiting for some folks to join us. I'm going to get you caught up on where House Bill 440, our Raise the Age bill, is right now in the legislative process. As I mentioned, this isn't the first year that we've seen a bill like this. We've seen bills like this introduced for several years now. This is just the most recent iteration, House Bill 440, sponsored by Chairman Randy Ballinger. And Chairman Ballinger has held 6 hearings now on it in the last 3 months, 6 hearings on the bill. She's really trying to dig into not just why we should raise the age, but how Georgia can do it, and looking at what that impact would look like on the system, trying to educate her committee members and the General Assembly at large about this issue. So we've already had several good hearings on the bill. We've got one more today, so if you're able to stick around for the rest of the day, at 1 p.m. in 406 CLOB, so across the street, 406 in the Coverdell Legislative Office Building, we're having, Chairman Ballinger is having another hearing on House Bill 440, Raise the Age, and we'll be hearing from the Georgia Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, who are going to give a comparative look at how kids are handled in the adult system versus how they are handled in the juvenile justice system. So they're going to give a really good detailed look at those different systems and how they operate, and why the juvenile justice system is the better system for these young people. I guess a couple of housekeeping notes. Throughout the day, because we've got a good panel of speakers prepared and ready to come speak, and some other folks, and we've got very little time to be in this room, we've asked y'all to use note cards to ask questions. I encourage your questions. I hope that we can have this be interactive, but also don't want to be too disruptive. So if you'd like to ask a question, there are note cards in the back of the room here with pens. Feel free to grab one now, grab a few now, and when you've got a question that you want answered, you can sort of wave it, and one of our many volunteers in the room will come by and pick it up. And then I guess let me indicate who volunteers are in case you've got any questions. If you're here to help, raise your hand. Pamela, raise your hand. We've got all sorts of people around the room. Like half the room is volunteers. Very helpful people. So if you need anything at all, we'll approach any of us and we'll try to help you out. All right. Since we're still waiting on some of our folks, I think that the Rules Committee is finishing up upstairs. I think we're going to jump straight into our panel discussion, and I'm going to hand it off to Ben Githea, who is a public defender in DeKalb County in Superior Court, right? He's going to be our moderator for this morning. We also have 2 folks here. Mr. T. Jess Bowers, who is an attorney in Cherokee County, and one of his clients, Dylan Little, who so graciously has agreed to come and spend his time with us today and share his personal story about being a young person moving through a system designed for adults. So I'm going to hand it off to them. We've got, again, more speakers who are coming, so I ask again for your flexibility, as I might jump up and introduce new folks, but I'm going to let them take it away for now.
Good morning, everyone. My name again is Ben Githea. Won't ask you to pronounce that. And I am in DeKalb County. I'm a public defender there. I've been doing so for about 11 years now. I enjoy my job. I represent the indigent, those who cannot afford to hire a private attorney of their own, and who have unfortunately been charged with a felony offense. I do not get to pick my clients. They come to me. They do not get to pick their attorney. I advocate for them. During my tenure as a public defender, I have seen numerous children being charged with adult offenses, and I have tried to help them navigate their way through the system. Most times I am successful, sometimes I am not, which is why I am a big advocate for this. I could not agree with Caitlin more about what she's saying. I talk with these young people, no offense, Doug, and they make impulsive decisions, and unfortunately there are a lot of collateral consequences to that, but we'll get into that in a little bit. At this time, I'll open the floor and let Dylan introduce himself as well as his attorney, or vice versa.
Sure. I'm T. Jess Bowers. I'm a criminal defense lawyer in Cherokee County. Cherokee is one of the few counties in Georgia that does not have a public defender office. We have the old school court-appointed system. And as much as Chief Justice Fletcher's work in bringing public defender offices across the state, I am proud to say that Cherokee County is one of the counties that was certainly the exception to the old rule. And not due to my services, but those who came before me. I'm a private attorney. People come in off the street, pay me a lot of money, maybe not as much money as I want to represent them. But I also take court appointment cases, and that's how I came to meet Dylan. I'm the second attorney on his case, not due to any wrinkles, but just due to the fact the prior attorney, who did a wonderful job, took a job down in Brunswick, left the county last November when I took over his case. Dylan's case, and Dylan is a person, Dylan is a actor within the criminal justice system, is very representative of the young people I've seen. And he's not the only one. We resolved his case in court approximately 2 weeks ago, which was 2.5 years after he was first arrested. He was arrested and charged with a number of entering locks, basically jiggling the handles of doors and residences, and then never breaking a window, but if there was something in it, he and some other boys would take it. His co-defendant was 16 years old. His best friend since second grade, I believe it was. Because he was 16, he was arrested along with Dylan. The officer called his parents. They picked him up. Dylan was taken to the county jail. Fortunately, the policy in Cherokee is for 17-year-olds, they keep them in segregation, so I was never worried about any violence that may come to him. Well, I say segregation, they keep him in a holding cell. He did have 2 adults, I think one in his 30s, one in his 50s, that were in the holding cell with him until he was able to be bonded out. Dylan is not the only client I have in similar boats. Right now, as we speak, just last night, I was talking to a 17-year-old young man who was homeless. Some issues at home, which was basically his resistance to authority, but along with 4 or 5 other boys who were 16, they were doing what's called, in my day, ding-dong DoorDash. He went to jail, stayed in jail, where the other boys were picked up by the police, taken into, released to their parents. The young man co-defendant in Dylan's case, his best friend since second grade, was in court within 2 months resolving, in the juvenile justice system, resolving his case. And 4 months later, it was over. Dylan just began his probation stint 2 weeks ago and stands to serve the next 5 years on probation. Both in Dylan's case as well as the other young man whose case is still pending and who until a few weeks ago was still homeless, neither of them were able to receive the services available to juveniles through the juvenile justice system. Both boys were treated just as if they were 50, 60-year-old men. Unfortunately, that led to this other client being homeless until just a few weeks ago, with an unknown resolution date in the future. Dylan's case, fortunately, despite the system, but with good work from his prior attorney and me bringing it home, it only took 2.5 years to resolve his case. Dylan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Actually, sorry, I'm going to make my first interruption, if you don't mind. Again, asking for everyone's flexibility. Wanted to first recognize Representative Darshan Kendrick, who is one of our very valued members of the House Juvenile Justice Committee. She's been attending these hearings and asking great questions of the experts that have been presenting, so just wanted to recognize her briefly. I know you've got to run soon, so thank you so much for being here. Yeah, thank you. And then she just came in, so I'm kind of getting her off guard a bit, but while she's here, and I know again that her time is short with us, Representative Mary Margaret Oliver has been introducing these raise the age bills for 4, 5, 6 years, something like that. So when I talk about legislative champions, she's who I think of on this issue, and all issues that affect kids in state custody in Georgia. So I'm again so grateful for her leadership and and for your time here. And then before I hand it off to her to make a few remarks, Representative Greg Kennard, thank you so much for being here as well. Just wanted to say hello to all of the lawmakers in the room. Thank you for sharing your time with us on a very, very busy morning. So,
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for engaging in this very important issue. Over my long political career, there have been a lot of small, medium, and a few large issues that I have participated in. Raise the age is a large issue. It is a heavy lift, but it is very important. And I am pleased that it is something I've been able to be free to engage in for a good while. The history of it, just briefly, is that almost 10 years ago, in the study to create a model juvenile court reform, placing 17-year-olds in the juvenile court jurisdiction was a part of the early drafts. And that was taken out of the early drafts based on a narrowing down of the big important issues in juvenile code reform. That juvenile code enactment 7 or 8 years ago was a very important reform step for Georgia. I'm pleased that I was able to participate in that. But the issue of raise the age came forward to the Criminal Justice Reform Commission. I was on the first Criminal Justice Reform Commission, and raise the age was again part of our discussions then. And it was fascinating. It's one of the things that keeps me coming back. There's certain days where the mood, the opportunity, the engagement is such that you really had the votes in the room. Here's the secret. It's about the votes. And on a certain day, I could sense that around a particular table of criminal justice reform, we had the votes to do away with private probation services and had the votes to raise the age. But based on the political process that is the real world political process down here, and based on what I think was a very strong, admirable contribution from Governor Nathan Deal, the raise the age issue was put off again. But in the meantime, every southern state around us and across the nation have now reduced the number of states to how many, Ray? Three states left in the United States of America that prosecute children as adults. My question to the leadership, the governor's office, lieutenant governor, House leaderships, do you want Georgia to be last?
No.
The answer to that question is what?
No.
All right. That's the question of the day. We have come further in 2020 than we have in any other year. There will be, I think, the 5th or 6th hearing this afternoon at 1 o'clock in room 406. You're all invited to come. Chairman Ballinger, who I'm sure will be here in just a few minutes, has shepherded this issue forward this year. It has gotten further, and I do anticipate that we're going to have some votes coming up. As you can read from the newspaper or even feel in this building, that we have a little tension this year around the budget. And that's why it was significant to me that on Friday, Valentine's Day, a news report came out again from Connecticut. I think Friday, February 14th, 2020 is a pretty updated news article that the Connecticut implementation of raise the age had not cost more money than the scare tactics were suggesting, and in fact had saved in a much smaller state over $50 million. The opposition that's coming from the status quoers is always going to come from the status quoers. The status quoers don't like status quo, and they don't like change. So we just have to realize that that's part of our world, in the real world of politics. And what I think would be very effective today, because y'all are here to be effective. You're not here just to kind of enjoy the noise of the theater of it. Every single person, if you would contact your personal representative, and if you don't know who your personal representative is, don't tell me, because that would upset me a lot. Contact your personal representative, contact your personal state senator, and tell them that you live in their district. Don't lie. Tell them that you live in their district and what precinct, and that you care about this issue. And before you leave a note in the governor's office saying, please support raise the age. Please support raise the age. Chairman Ballinger has come in, and I am delighted to turn it over to her. I just did a tiny bit of history and said that based on your leadership, we are now moving further than we have in any other year. And I was suggesting they might want to contact the people that represent you in this building and help us move this ball along.
Yeah, I will say that it is a large lift. This is kind of a seismic shift in policy in the state of Georgia, and we're getting a lot of pushback from a lot of the interested groups. Our juvenile court judges are worried that they're going to be overwhelmed, and our sheriffs are really, really very much opposed to this issue, and they've put out some information basically talking about how awful that it will be if this bill were to come to fruition and get passed. So there is a lot of opposition. There's also a lot of inertia with the bill. There's a lot of people that are just like, well, we don't see anything wrong, we don't really care if we like our 17-year-olds and we shouldn't. So making them care about the issue is really paramount. Making them interested, making them care, putting a human face to this is really important. So whenever you're talking to folks at the ropes and you're advocating for the bill, let them know how it impacts 17-year-olds. The vast majority of these cases are misdemeanors. So it's really important that they understand the importance of the issue and how exactly it's going to impact and how it will change and what better outcomes that we're going to get for our 17-year-olds. There's also a very daunting fiscal note that has been issued by the Department of Audits. It was basically a blank check that they offered the Department of Juvenile Justice. And so we have some very good information. Josh River from the Sentencing Project is going to be presenting very briefly. Yay, Josh! Thank you for coming down and helping us today. Who's going to be kind of refuting a lot of that information. They said that they needed over $200 million for new facilities, and it was going to cost roughly about $60 million annually to raise the age here in Georgia. So that's kind of what we're up against. So your help and your advocacy is very much needed just to make the case and make sure that everybody knows how important this is for Georgia. So.
I just emailed to Polly, Polly, raise your hand, the editorial that came out, the information that came out on Valentine's Day on Connecticut cost analysis.
Yeah.
That was it's very encouraging to see these continual cost analysis. The Commissioner of DJJ admitted, when I questioned him last week, that his estimates of cost were based on an assumption that all of the 17-year-olds arrested would in fact be incarcerated.
And incarcerated forever.
Forever.
So, they would just go to jail forever.
Forever. And that happens out of the 5,800 17-year-olds. We don't know how often it happens. I would guess maybe 20 times. No jail wants anybody in their jail, period, and a 17-year-old misdemeanor is somebody they're going to turn away pretty quickly. The lady I practice law with in Decatur is she's one of her part-time jobs is City of Decatur Municipal Judge. And the City of Decatur is kind of typical. They don't have a jail, they've got a closet. So whenever they arrest on the weekend for being irritating somebody, usually based on alcohol on the weekend, they put in the closet and they have a judge that comes every morning. And I questioned her, okay, who showed up this morning? The lady taking a shower with her hose without any clothes on. The guy that was sleeping on this bench and wouldn't move to that bench. Those are the kind of people, 17-year-old who's irritating somebody in the city of Decatur is going to be sent away. He's going to be in the closet 6 hours maybe. So our real deficiency here that I can't solve by the time you go to the ropes is what's the truth of the 5,800 or so 17-year-olds. How many times do they spend more than 24 hours in jail? And how many of those 5,800 who will have a permanent arrest record for the rest of their life, how many of those folks are convicted? When we learn the evidence-based answers to those questions, we can move the ball. But you being here is going to help us move the ball particularly. Questions?
Anybody have any questions?
Thank you both again so much for your leadership and your time. Feel free to hang out. I also know it's a busy morning, so go on. Please thank our folks. All right. and that's good timing because our final panelist has also joined the room, so I'll introduce her real quick and then give it back to Ben. And thank you and my apologies. As she's coming up, Maria Palacios is she is the Deputy Director now of Georgia Shift. She's coming up, there she is. And she's, it's a group that's been working to support the Raise the Age effort, but she's also got her own personal story about a struggle that her family has been experiencing. So I'm going to let her join the panel and hand it back over to Ben.
Yes. So for those of you who are just entering, we were introduced to Mr. Dylan Little. He's supported here by his attorney, who also just kind of gave a preview of what Dylan has had to encounter as a 17-year-old. Again, not to regurgitate what you just previously said, but he was charged along with his 16-year-old friend from 3rd grade. The 16-year-old was able to resolve his case after 2 months. Is that what I understand?
In court in 2 months and actually done with the system in 6.
Okay, and Dylan just now, after 2.5 years, was able to resolve his case, and it sounded like he got a probated sentence for 5 years. Is that correct? So for the next 5 years, you have to stay out of trouble, and this is going to be something that you have to deal with, right? So Dylan, what I wanted you to do is if you could tell everyone, how was it when you got arrested? What do you remember from that day?
Well, it was pretty embarrassing, really. I mean,
I know
you got all the adults in there.
But if you could speak up just a little bit.
You got all the adults in there kind of asking you, like, why are you here? You know, like, you're a little young to be in here. And you have to explain it to everybody, and then pretty much sat in there in holding cell for 10.5 hours with 2 elderly men, been arrested for things way worse than I did. And they say you get first call when you go to jail, or a free call. That was a lie. So I about got caught another charge just for banging on the glass, trying to find out if my mother was coming to get me or not. Because I didn't really feel comfortable with the people that I was in there with. But other than that, I mean...
How long were you in jail?
It was about a total of 10.5 hours for my mother bonding me out.
So did you finally get to make that call?
Nope.
No?
Never did.
You just know that your mom came and got you?
Luckily she come, yeah.
So you said that you were in there with gentlemen that you didn't feel comfortable with. Were they significantly older than you?
Yes.
Okay. And they were asking all kinds of questions, but it didn't get physical or anything?
No.
Okay. And Dylan, when you got out, did your mom have to pay money for you to get out?
Yes.
Okay. And that wasn't from your pocket or your bank account, was it?
No.
Okay. And if she didn't have that money, you probably would have still been in jail, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, your friend, do you know how long he was in jail?
He did not even go to jail.
He didn't go to jail at all?
No.
Okay, so he was released to his parents?
Yes.
Okay. And he did end up resolving his case, right?
Yes.
All right. Now, it took 2.5 years for you to resolve your case. What was going on in the meantime?
Just thoughts and questions and what's going to come about it. And then you look at, talk to other family members and stuff that had the same charges throughout the years. They're telling me that as far as, well, for example, my father, he had the same charges when he was 19 years old. Well, the judge put him in prison for 2 years.
Wow.
So, that was kind of hanging over my head. I was real worried, I'm way too young to be going to prison.
Right. And I'm sure you've heard that prison isn't a place you'd like to be.
No.
Right. And so, did you have to check in periodically with the bonding company, with the court?
I went to probably 20 arraignments.
Wow. Okay. And Dylan, were you in school at the time?
I was for a portion of the time, yes.
Did this affect you in school?
Sometimes. Every once in a while I had to, take out of school to go to court.
Did you have to constantly explain yourself to your classmates or to your teachers?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when you said you had 10 arraignments, who took you to those appointments?
My mother and father.
Okay. You couldn't go on your own?
Not
right.
For the most of them, no, but after about 2.5 years, I was able, finally they got tired of just showing up and leaving, so.
And I know this is your buddy from second grade, wasn't it?
Yes.
How did you feel knowing that you were put in jail and he was able to go home?
It really bothered me because, I mean, he, like he told y'all 2 months after, he was already in court, got pretrial diversion, got put on, I think it was 4 months probation, and he's already off that probation now. It's fully off the record. And 2 weeks ago, I just now got put on probation for it.
So Dylan, where do you hope to be in 5 years?
Off probation. But no, really, I've been trying to improve myself, make a difference. I got a job now, be able to pay all the fines and fees and restitution and things like that.
Okay, thank you, Dylan, for sharing. At this time, I'd like to introduce Miss Maria Palacios. You did a brief introduction. I didn't know if you wanted to do that. Just introduce yourself.
Yes, so good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Palacios. I'm very happy to be here on behalf of Georgia Shift. Georgia Shift is a nonprofit organization dedicated to working with young people of color. Specifically outside the metro area, it's headquartered out of Augusta, and there's plenty of advocacy days that go on with Georgia Shift and Race Age. It's definitely something that is a high priority. I'm actually here not so much as traditionally I'm here as a policy analyst, work that I've done for about over 4 years now, but today I'm actually here to discuss my youngest biological brother and his story from when he was 17. So my then 17-year-old brother was arrested. He had a learner's permit. He didn't have a full license yet, and he was pulled over for speeding. And after the officer realized he had a learner's permit, they started searching the vehicle. It was him and a friend, and they found less than an ounce of cannabis in the vehicle, and so he went to jail. Both him and his friend did, and so my youngest brother his name is Daniel, and he actually tried very, very hard to be here today, and he hates public speaking, which I completely understand, but he was very willing actually to be here, and he's been the face of some flyers for Georgia Shift. So Georgia Shift doesn't just put out their stock images. He wanted to be here today, but he actually couldn't get off his construction job. My brother's a U.S. born, the first in our family to be born in the United States. Our parents came here on migrant farm worker visas to work in fields in Naples, tomato fields. My mother has worked in the poultry industry her entire life. She has worked very hard. She was a single mother the majority of her life, but she did marry my youngest brother's father, and he grew up with his father around. Well, months before his arrest, my mother and stepfather started going through a divorce, and it took a humongous toll on my brother. He started to become very depressed. He started to, as he told me, spend time in the only thing that he felt would never be taken away from him, and that was a car that his dad had financed and was paying on, who had left. And so to see him and to know that part of his charges were traffic violations, and imagine as with a learner's permit he's going to jail, and being bonded out, and it was a very traumatic experience for him. He'd never really gotten in trouble in school. He'd always kept to himself. He was very quiet. He wasn't the best academically. He said it was hard to keep up with me, that he hated the comparison, but he definitely had never gotten in trouble. Was a very calm, nice, very empathetic young man who I love very much. And so seeing him go through that definitely has been even more real every time I talk about Race Age.
And him going through that, he was already dealing with the divorce, and I understand that's traumatic for anyone, no matter what age they are.
Yes.
What did you see him going through?
I saw him go into depression even further. I saw him coincidentally in jail. He met people who later he would have to do probation alongside, and people who only further told him to not worry about school, that he needed to prioritize paying this off. He didn't want to be on probation forever, so he actually dropped out of high school. And he started working at McDonald's, and McDonald's is a wonderful job to be able to have. Started working night shift to be able to pay off his probation and to pay back my mother over $3,000 that she had paid for an attorney to be able to represent him, because she was very afraid that he would be put away in jail for a long period of time, especially because of the cannabis.
So $3,000 for legal representation for a traffic offense and for less than an ounce of marijuana.
Yes.
In addition to the fines and fees that were part of his probation, is that what I'm
Yes.
understanding? And he didn't have this money himself, right?
Correct.
So he had to get that from his parents because he's still a child.
Right.
Right. And can you tell me how this also affected your family, not just him?
Yes, so again, my mother was a single mother of 4 when she met my stepfather, and the immigration process is always something that, even in renewal, you spend a lot of money on. And so we grew up very, very poor, and after my stepfather left, she was actually about to lose her house. And my brother knew that was going on, and so add to delayed mortgage payments, you had this. So my mother would pick up extra shifts and try to do odd jobs here and there, cleaning houses. And going through divorce was also something very, very difficult. So it took a humongous toll on my mother. My mother, after taxes, makes about $340 a week. And so she used money, her entire savings, to be able to bond him out, and had to borrow. So it's still something that, to this day, he's about to turn 20 in April. He's still on probation. He's still trying to pay off his probation fines. And my mother's still trying to pay back a title loan that she got for it, and has barely caught up with mortgage payments. She's had to rent out rooms in her house, which again is another situation. I have kids, and so when I go visit her, we never spend the night because we don't really know fully the people renting in her house. So it's taken a humongous toll on our family, on our ability to spend time together, and on my brother. To be very honest, his depression spiraled even more, and there were moments that we weren't sure that he was going to make it through. And I think life is hard enough. I don't think our policies need to make it harder for young men.
I agree. Can you tell everyone how, in your opinion, this could or should have been handled differently?
I definitely think he should have been treated like the young man he was, the juvenile he was. If he wasn't old enough, he didn't have enough years in his life to have a learner's permit, he definitely should not have gone to prison. I don't think that he should have been handled alongside men significantly older than him, who told him to drop out of school, who were very persistent about it. And I think that my brother should have been given the opportunity to have rectified his situation like a juvenile, like someone who's underage, so that he could have gone to school. He could have finished school, and now he's, he works, he's a day laborer, he works in construction. And I don't think that should have been his future at this point in his life.
And his case has been resolved?
He's still on probation, yes. He agreed to do probation and pay fines. So outside of that, his case.
How long is he on probation? How long is he on probation?
I know he has 6 months left, and that's, of course, if he pays his fee off.
Hopefully get in earlier. Gotcha. And you're here because you support the Raise the Age, correct?
Completely.
Yes. And can you tell everyone why? I mean, I think they know why, but if there's anything else you wanted to add.
I think given where we're at in this country, given the fact that there's so much depression, honestly, the amount of suicide rates for our young people has spiked significantly. It would definitely be something that I personally call a crisis. I think that raising the age is something that we don't often think about in terms of what are our youth going to look like, not just today, but what are they going to look like 10 years from now when they're making very important life decisions for our country's well-being. And I don't think we take that into consideration. There's plenty of stats, I think, on the financial viability of this. I think there's plenty of stats of why this would be good for the criminal justice system overall. But we really need to think about individual young men who shouldn't have such harsh punishments and then further being placed into a system where they're only going to create more cyclical obstacles for themselves. I think we need to remember they're still children, cognitively, psychologically, and I don't think we need to turn our backs on children.
I had a similar story. I have a cousin. His son is 17. He lives in Cherokee County. He also is driving on a limited permit. And I think he borrowed the family's, secondary car that doesn't get driven much, and the tag had expired by a month. So he was pulled over for expired tag, driving on a limited permit. The officer took him to jail for traffic offenses. He now has a criminal arrest history that will be with him the rest of his life for a traffic offense. And I think that's a problem. So I agree with you that it could be handled a lot differently. Just telling you guys a little bit about myself. I grew up right down the street, actually looking at the state capitol from my bedroom window. It was a very impoverished neighborhood. There's a lot going on to, as they say, clean the neighborhood up, so I'm excited about that. I never in a million years thought I'd be here talking to you all in this particular capacity. I too experienced a lot of my friends being charged as adults. I've also seen a lot of my 17-year-old classmates being taken through the system, and I saw the just irreversible effects of that. Once you've been taken into the system, and Dylan can tell you, Maria just said it, is also a lot of kids drop out. I was fortunate to have support in my family, and so they stood by me, and I was able to graduate, and here I am today. So I too support this. I won't get on my soapbox, but I just think that the numbers support this. I'm all for it. Again, I can't reiterate what everyone has said. Thanks to all the chairmen for being here, and I just wanted to open up the floor again to Attorney Bowers and see if there was anything else that you wanted to add to what you said earlier.
One thing I would add, although we were able to resolve Dylan's case without additional incarceration, in his 2.5-year odyssey from the day he was arrested until we resolved it in court, it took about a year, which is within the 6 to 18-month range, for his case to be indicted. The reason it did not promptly resolve after that is that the line-level prosecutor who had his case was willing to offer probation. However, her supervisor, approximately 12 years experience, wanted a year in prison for Dylan. She knew that was, the line-level prosecutor knew that was wrong. My predecessor, the criminal defense attorney, knew that that would happen over her dead body, God bless her. They had come to a professional agreement after some time that the prosecutor would request of the judge a 90 to 120 days in a state probation detention center. And for anyone who doesn't think 3 to 5 months sounds long, that's after you sit in county jail for up to 6 months waiting for a debt. They had agreed. Dylan's case was assigned to a wonderful judge who's been on the Superior Court bench, I think 12 years now. Was a juvenile court judge in the county for about 10 years prior to that. Every time they set it down for what we call a non-negotiated or a straight-up plea, the assigned judge was not available, and a retired Superior Court judge from the circuit was sitting in. The prior attorney knew, as I know, that the judge would have sent Dylan to a year in prison. That kept being delayed until eventually the prior defense attorney took a job in Brunswick. I came on in November, could not get the young prosecutor to budge. Fortunately, and this was entirely just luck of the draw, in January that prosecutor was reassigned as part of a normal rotation to a new courtroom. A new hire with approximately 10 years of experience came in, took a look at the file, said that this is a probation case, and within a month and a half we were in front of the Superior Court judge resolving this probation. The exposure Dylan had to go to prison, he's 19 years old today, same age that his father was years ago when he went to prison under similar charges. It was very real, it was very palpable. It was not merely Dylan's fear of a similar fate to his father. It was real, and but for my predecessor, it would have happened. So I want everyone, advocates as well as in legislators we have in Britain, to know that does happen. That's not a scare tactic by any side. And not to speak for the advocates, but my own 2 cents. There was a local news article in the Cherokee County paper about 2 weeks ago mentioning this bill. It quoted a legislator, I honestly don't remember the person's name, and it was one sentence, perhaps taken out of context. But the quote from the legislator was, "I think we all know what the right thing to do on this bill is." And then followed by, however, we have to, in this year of budget tightening, we have to look at the cost. As an attorney, as a criminal defense attorney, as Dylan's lawyer, as a resident of the state of Georgia, lifelong, born about 2 miles down the street at the old Georgia Baptist Hospital, 35 years of my life here in Atlanta, I was offended, personally, professionally, and morally. But to the extent that there is any validity to the financial side of it, I would ask that legislator and all the others to ask themselves, what is the cost of not changing? Thank you.
You brought up an excellent point, and not to go down a rabbit hole, but you were indicating that at one point you were dealing with the prosecutor probably early in their career that was gunning for prison time. They couldn't fully appreciate...
not to interrupt you, it was... That prosecutor has a reputation of, as you know, we call them baby lawyers, baby prosecutors, and as a general rule, absolutely, her offers are above what we would consider appropriate, even the judges. In this instance, though, it worked the other way. She actually, the first prosecutor, she felt personally that probation would be appropriate. It was her supervisor who told her flat out, no, go for 1 year in prison. To her credit, she then lowered it at some point to probation detention cell, but did not have the strength of character to say right is right and to go with what her gut told her. Fortunately, the more experienced prosecutor that came on next not only knew what was right,
and had the fortitude that they had,
regardless of what his new supervisor told him.
Great, thank you. Dylan, is there anything else you'd like to add? What would you like to let these people know about your experience other than what you said? What would you change?
Pretty much it was just put out there how scary it was being in a holding cell with, like I said, a 57-year-old man that had been arrested for possession of methamphetamine. And I had never been around that in my life, you know, and and he's asking me weird questions, and I don't know what to say. And then there was another man in there. I can't off the top of my head remember what he was arrested for, but pretty much told me, kind of like she said, you know, you have to get you a job and pay for this. You know, you better get out and work. So then later on, I did drop out of school my last 3 year. It's a big regret, but if I'd have done that at the time, I could have done graduated before my case was ever even resolved. So, yeah.
Do you think you'd be in a better position today going forward if your case had been treated like your best friend from second grade?
Yes, definitely.
I think you'd have been able to graduate?
About positive of it.
He graduated, didn't he?
Yes.
Well, I'll share another story then. I also have represented, like I said, thousands of clients. I can recall a 17-year-old who was charged with a burglary. And I know burglary by some can be categorized as a violent offense, and you know, it's something that we need to protect ourselves from. I don't want my home burglarized, but he was tried as an adult, entered a plea under first offender, which allows you not to have a felony conviction if you do everything that you're supposed to do on probation. That was a 5-year period. In that time, though, if a judge does not restrict your record, employers can see that arrest. So it acts as a barrier to employment, and I had him on a probation revocation because it is cyclical, and I was asking him what happened, and he just said, every time I get a job, I work it for a month or two, and I put on my application that I'm not a convicted felon because that's what my lawyer told him, and that is legally correct. But then his employer sees it on his arrest record and says, well, hold on, you deceived me. And so he instantly loses his job, which means he can't pay his probation fees, he can't pay his fines, and thus he finds himself with a probation violation, and he's back in the system. And he may be revoked for a longer period of time than he would have been on the initial sentence. And so be careful on probation. Please do what you're asked to do, but it's a cyclical problem as well. And had he been treated as a juvenile like his co-defendants were, he could have graduated high school, and I think now one is a junior in college, where he is just working a job at a warehouse, anything that he can find. And I'll just leave you guys with this, by Frederick Douglass. It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men.
On that, I want to say thank you. Thanks so much for your time today. I think we've got a few minutes, so if anyone's got questions for any of our panelists or for me. We've also got a couple of other experts in the room. Josh Rovner with the Sentencing Project, who's been doing some great data work for us. Tracy Tucker from South Carolina, who's going to maybe give just some short remarks about implementation in South Carolina. But before we get there, just wanted to open up to any questions you've got for the panelists before I let them go. If you've written them down, we can take those. If not, then we can... I'm sorry. Does anyone? I can like take one if you've got any. All right, everyone feels satisfied so far? Good. All right. Well, thank you so much again. I'll let y'all can hang out up here as you finish up, or y'all can disperse. So, wanted to now turn to Tracy Tucker, who has so graciously joined us from South Carolina. She has been supporting our work here in Georgia to raise the age, and is here to talk a little bit about what it looks like to implement Raise the Age in South Carolina. As we've already mentioned, you've heard a few times now, over the last 10 years, about a dozen states or so have raised their age in juvenile court jurisdiction to include 17-year-olds, and in some cases, 16 and 17-year-olds for those states that had very low ages of criminal responsibility. South Carolina, many of those states are our neighbors in the South, not all of them, so it's sort of an interesting swath across the country, but many of our southeastern neighbors have raised the age, and I think South Carolina is our most recent southern area change.
North Carolina is December.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and there's the map actually, and you can only not really quite see it. That's okay. It's on some of the fact sheets in the back, you can take a look at that. So this question, as we've all sort of been alluding to a little bit, we've been able to move away from should we do this, is this the right thing to do, into a little bit more like how can we do this, how can we raise the age in Georgia. And I think that while all states are unique, all criminal justice and juvenile justice systems are unique from one state to the next, we think that learning from lessons that other states have had to learn kind of the hard way, that might be really helpful as we continue down this path. So I wanted to give Tracy just a few minutes or as much time as you like to give some remarks about what it was like implementing, getting it done first of all, getting it through the legislature, but also implementation now that you're just at the beginning of that. So I'll hand it over to Tracy.
Sure, thank you, Caitlin. My name is Tracy Tucker. I'm with the Campaign for Youth Justice. The Campaign for Youth Justice is a national nonprofit whose mission is to end the prosecution, sentencing, and incarceration of young people under the age of 18 in the adult criminal justice system. And so I'm from Columbia, South Carolina. I live in Columbia, South Carolina, and so I was initially hired by the campaign to do work around building a statewide coalition to address implementation of Raise the Age in South Carolina. So when I kind of came into the picture in South Carolina, the law had already been passed. So in 2016, South Carolina unanimously passed legislation to raise the age to 18 so that in South Carolina, 17-year-olds would no longer be considered as adults. Well, most. If our law included E and F level felonies and misdemeanors with South Carolina's law. But South Carolina's laws had some contingencies in it, and I'm going to read it exactly so I can get it. So our South Carolina's law had a delayed implementation for 3 years to July of 2019. And it was, the clause is the act would take effect on July the 1st, 2019, contingent on the Department of Juvenile Justice having received any funds that may be necessary for implementation. And so it also directed agencies that would be impacted by Raise the Age to sort of submit budget requests, and it did also direct those agencies to begin to prepare. But quite frankly, because of that contingency language that it would be dependent on funding, many stakeholders did not think that the law would actually be implemented. And so that's why we came in to kind of initiate a statewide coalition to kind of push for implementation. And I also want to say that part of, as initial advocates, when we first got together, sort of our first convenings, part of our talking point was that similar to Georgia, it was what we needed to do. Like Georgia had juvenile justice reform, Georgia has built out a continuum of evidence-based services for young people, and so part of our narrative was that South Carolina could raise the age if we did like Georgia did, and we did a reform to our code, and that we implemented, these sorts of community-based services, a continuum of services for young people. So first, as I said, we started out sort of with advocates who were supportive of the law and who served young people who were involved in the system. And so then, we have an implementation guide that's on our website, and I can get copies to folks. Caitlin has everyone's email address. We can email that out to everyone. But that's what the first step is to really just convene people. So after we had our initial group of advocates, we sort of expanded that to include system stakeholders, the Department of Juvenile Justice, the Department of Social Services, our solicitors, law enforcement, and what we did is we had 2 statewide convenings to bring people together to begin to talk about how we could implement Raise the Age in South Carolina. And so the Department of Juvenile Justice initially put forth a budget of $35 million that would include 2 new facilities, and then the next year that went up to $55 million, but still for the same 2 facilities. And the 2 facilities that the Department of Juvenile Justice felt that we needed in South Carolina were an evaluation center. We have these evaluation centers in South Carolina, and an additional detention center. I should also mention in South Carolina, there's only one statewide detention center for young people that serves our entire state, but then we also have 3 local in our larger cities. So technically there are 4 detention centers in South Carolina, which is very different from Georgia as well. What we were able to find that similar to Georgia through the help of Josh Rovner from the Sentences Project is in really looking at the data in South Carolina is that the majority of young people in South Carolina are there for very low-level offenses and nonviolent offenses, and that they really would be sort of best served in the community. Through that first convening, we just identified those concerns from the Department of Juvenile Justice with regard to their concerns about, the capacity at the detention center, their capacity at the eval center. From that first convening, there was also concerns about with judges, that perhaps judges were using detention in our evaluation centers sort of as a punishment, and that we need to do some education around that. And so then our next step, which is also in the implementation guide, which is really talking in localities about, the changes that we could make, either policy or legislative changes that could be made to prepare for implementation. And so what we did was from that first convening, we started to have monthly stakeholder calls. And on those monthly stakeholder calls, we could have folks from different agencies on to kind of talk about what their concerns were. We would bring in guest speakers from other states who had done this already so that they could talk to the issues, they could talk to folks' concerns. And then also it gave the stakeholders an opportunity to kind of brainstorm, because you'll find that in different counties, people have different programs. One solicitor would be like, well, I just contract with a kid and I just draw up this. And they would kind of share that with the other solicitors in other areas. And so from those conversations, we were able to come up with the draft legislation that we presented to the legislature that had, input from all these sort of system stakeholders. So we were able to do that. We also did a webinar for judges to talk about what the data was in South Carolina. To also, we had a judge from another state to come in to talk about, how it impacted his caseload. So we're able to kind of provide that to kind of alleviate some concerns. And then, I think that's all I've heard. Yes, and so with the detention, so the concern around detention, what we did was we introduced our Department of Juvenile Justice with Annie Casey Foundation. Maybe introduced is the wrong word. We reconnected them to the Annie Casey Foundation with the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiatives so that they could begin to kind of work with our Department of Juvenile Justice in South Carolina to really think about how we could do things differently. And so our second statewide convening was really Annie Casey coming to speak with all the stakeholders, the solicitors, law enforcement, young people, public defenders, about what, a different sort of a system would look like. We actually had just Chesky from Georgia come and talk about how he's doing things a little differently in his county. What really was key for the success, of which I think will be key for Georgia, is really the recognition that local stakeholders have to kind of begin to come together and to really talk about what it would look like for their localities. Our law sort of directed that agencies do that, but there really was no formal process in place. And so North Carolina has put in place in their law, included in their legislation, a committee to look in the issue. And so I think it would be really important to have some sort of a body that's sort of overseeing things, where counties could actually sort of check in, that we're making progress, or we've reviewed our numbers and this is what we think we need, and to get feedback from, experts or others in the field that have done it, to sort of help to guide Georgia in the process. I think that's come to the end of the points that I hope to make with y'all. I think I just wanted to say that Georgia definitely can do this without building new facilities. That this is it. The budget for South Carolina was always a concern because, we had these crazy $35, $55 million, so everyone was like, oh, it's never going to happen. So what ultimately happened in South Carolina, through the use of Josh's data, sort of similarly in Georgia, we were able to show that the levels of youthful offending have been declining every year, yet the budget is increasing, right? So in South Carolina, we were able to kind of say, look, the numbers are going down, your budget's going up, like, surely there's capacity within the system to absorb these 17-year-olds. And I believe in South Carolina, our numbers were from like 2009. So like our numbers would have been the same as the number of 12 to 16-year-olds that the system served in 2009 that they would be serving in like 2016 or 17. And so that was really key. And what we were able to do was we were able to convince legislators of that point. And our Department of Juvenile Justice had some carry forward money from the past year. And we were able to get a budget proviso introduced that the department would use that money to sort of help fund any Raise the Age initiatives through the use of community-based, evidence-based services. So that's how it was ultimately implemented through that proviso in South Carolina. But I would certainly sort of recommend that Georgia put, the mechanisms in place to prepare for implementation ahead of time and not sort of do it the flip side the way that South Carolina did.
Is that it?
Okay, I think I got all my points, y'all. Thank you.
I want to lift up three things that that Tracy shared with us as we transition to the last part of our program this morning. The first is what she mentioned, I think we've heard it a few more times this morning, that juvenile crime rates across the board, including 17-year-olds, the exact population we're talking about, have been dropping in Georgia since 2008, and that's basically as far back as I care to look. So maybe even before then. But certainly for the last 10, 11, 12 years or so, we have seen consistently crime rates among juveniles dropping in Georgia specifically. This matches the national trend. This isn't any surprise to us. So this is what we know. That currently, I like to think about this, if we had passed Raise the Age 10 years ago with our juvenile justice reform efforts then, we would still be serving fewer kids today in the system than we would still be serving fewer kids in the system, right? Because these arrest rates are going down, the crime rates are going down, and that's true of 17-year-olds in Georgia. So I wanted to lift that up. The second thing I wanted to lift up is what Tracy mentioned. We've already done a lot of good work to improve our juvenile justice system in this state. I'm not suggesting that it's perfect. I'm not suggesting that that's like the place we want all of our kids to be. But if they have to be in some system, it's not the worst one to be in, and it's certainly preferable to the adult system. So we've already done some of that work that other states have had to do in tandem with raising the age in terms of moving more kids out of those expensive facility placements and back into the community where they can be served at lower cost and to greater effect. So we've already done a lot of that work, which is good that we can sort of skip those steps because we've done it. The last thing that I want to lift up as we transition to the last piece of the puzzle is this sounds like a lot of work, and no, it's good work. But this is you heard Representative Oliver say it, you heard Chairman Ballinger say it. It's going to take some work. It's going to take some work to get it done, to get it out of this building, and it's going to take some work to do it properly once we're on the ground. It's going to take some work. It's work worth doing. It is money worth spending. Again, our kids will have better outcomes, and our communities will be safer and stronger for it. So it's worth doing now. To get it out of this building, that's the first step. We've got to convince the people in this building to vote for it. So we're going to transition to supporting you and reaching out to your lawmakers today, if you can. They're all in the building. They've been out of session for a week and a half, and they're all back today and busy and ready to hear from you. So if you're able to stick around, I encourage you today to try to go talk to your House member especially, but also the Senate about Raise the Age and other juvenile justice issues that concern you or other issues that concern you. So we're going to give you some tips about how to do that today. If you can't stick around today, or if you're not able to catch up with them because they are pretty busy, send an email after the fact. Give them a call. These are people who are responsive to their constituents. If you say that you are a constituent and you want to talk to them about an issue, they will make time for you. And if not, keep bugging them about it because it is their job to make time for you. So that's what we're going to move to now. I've got a quick video. Josh, could you do me a favor and turn on that speaker?
Hi, welcome to our top 10 tips for talking to lawmakers. I'm Polly McKinney, and this is my co-host, Sprinkles the Bear. We are going to spend the next few minutes showing you the best ways to talk to your lawmaker. Tip number 1, introduce yourself and smile. Hello, Senator Sprinkles. I'm Polly McKinney. It's nice to meet you. I work at the Polly's Children's After School program. Tip number 2, have a clear and concise ask, which does not mean that you tell them your entire life story and the story of your great Aunt Bertha and everything else. You keep it very simple and very clean, like this. Senator, I would love it if you could come and visit my after-school program. Tip 3, prioritize your talking points. You have to do that because a lot of times these guys are really busy and they don't have time to hear everything that you would like them to know. So you have to kind of let the most important stuff start out your conversation. So it's worth taking a few minutes before you meet with them to think through the top 3 things that you want them to remember after their conversation with you is over. So for instance, I would say to the bear, I think after school is the most important thing that this legislature could fund because kids need that support to get better grades and to have better outcomes for the rest of their lives. Like that. Tip number 4, be polite and respectful. That means that you don't blow bubblegum bubbles in their faces and you make eye contact if you can and you recognize the fact that they're working really hard to do the right thing. Tip number 5, don't make assumptions. So when you come to the General Assembly, a lot of times you could possibly find yourself seeing somebody who is a Democrat or Republican or independent and assuming that they're going to think a certain thing or vote a certain way or do a certain something or other. Or you could say that they're male or female or different colors of skin and make assumptions. I recommend not making any assumptions because many of these folks are here just to do good for the state of Georgia. And a lot of times they'll surprise you. Okay, tip number 6, be honest. If you are talking to an elected official or a policymaker and they ask you a question and you don't know the answer, just own that. It's okay. It's okay not to know everything. You can say, you know, actually that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Let me find out and I will get back to you. But be sure you get back to them when you say that. But it's okay not to have all the answers. Why, how much honey is in that honey bee hive? I don't know the answer to that, but I will go weigh it and call you back and let you know the answer. Tip number 7, be a good listener. A lot of times you can make good advocacy headway by listening to what the person you're talking to thinks about your issue. Much of the best work I've ever gotten to do has been because I was listening to folks who were disagreeing with me, and I was able to listen well enough that I could understand why they were concerned with what I wanted to do. And once you know that, you can address those concerns and take it to the next level. And a lot of times, you can win someone over by simply understanding why it is that they don't agree with you. So, Senator Sprinkles, why don't you think that every bear should be tagged? Oh, really? Well, what if we just tagged the bears who volunteered to be tagged? Oh, good. I can agree with you on that, too. Tip number 8, don't get frustrated. Making laws and policies takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of patience. So, big advice, don't give up, but don't get frustrated, and just know that sometimes things take longer than you might expect. What do you mean they didn't hear my billing committee, Mr. Bear? I was so hopeful. Oh, we just ran out of time because we had a debate on a bigger bill, so don't worry, we'll get to it next week, I promise. Okay, great, thank you so much. I'll be here. Thanks. Tip number 9, offer to follow up later. A lot of times the best way to build a relationship with your legislator is to make sure that they know that you're available to help them out later in the session or when it's not the legislative session, and leave your contact information with them and get there so that you can email back and forth and maybe send them your thoughts or advice, or maybe they can ask you a question. A lot of the best work is done kind of like this. Senator Sprinkles, thank you so much, and I know that this bill isn't necessarily going to go this session, but I'd really like to talk to you more about it in the interim, in the summer. Would it be possible for me to set up a meeting in your district office? Sure, I'll have my assistant call you. It works like that. Oh, tip number 10 is say thank you. Everybody up here is trying to do the best they can, and it really gets you a long way to make sure that they know that you know how hard they're working. So it's great to look at Senator Sprinkles here and say, thank you so much for all you do for kids. I really appreciate this work. So this is me saying goodbye along with my friends Sprinkles and Sprinkleette, and we hope that this little video has made talking to a legislator as easy as well talking to a stuffed bear. See you later. Bye.
Logistical pieces of this really quickly. Your ask for today is if you're in the House, so that's where you should start. That's on the other side of the building with the House of Representatives, is to ask folks to sign the bill. Chairman Ballinger is the sponsor of the bill, but any number of people, of legislators, can sign the bill, which means they're sort of signing on for support, and she's looking for a little support in getting more people to sign the bill from both parties, so both Democrats and Republicans. So if you're looking for your one concise ask of House members, it is to talk to Chairman Ballinger about signing the bill. An
What's
easier
the bill
one,
number?
House Bill 440, House Bill 440. If you want something a little bit easier, a little bit more general, just ask, will you support raising the age in Georgia? And see where you get with that. You've heard all sorts of talking points and things about raising the age, but we've got agendas, and the bottom half of the agenda has 3 bullet points that you can use as your talking points if you are looking for a little bit of support and talking to folks. There's also fact sheets back there that you can review and pull anything from that. But you've heard a lot today, and I think anything that resonated with you is what you can share and say that you've been at an event this morning and listening to people who have been impacted by this law. And this is something that really struck me. So that those are good things, good points to hit. I do encourage you to think about that. Think about what you're going to say as you're waiting for your lawmaker. On the back table, we also have page cards. So the way that you talk to, or I guess we'll do this. The way that you talk to your legislators in this building is by filling out a small card, handing it to a middle schooler who will run into the chamber, find your lawmaker, and bring them back out to you if they're available. So you don't get to go, no one gets to go on the chamber floor except for these pages and guests of the lawmakers. So you have to kind of stand behind these velvet ropes and wait for your lawmaker that way. There's a desk on both sides for the House and the Senate where a couple of women will sit and take your page card for you, and they'll help you out. They'll tell you where to stand and help you sort of figure out who you're looking for. If you do not know, we've got page cards in the back that you can take and fill out and take up to the House and the Senate. In the House, you're asking specifically for folks to sign the bill because that's where the House Bill 440 is still pending in committee there. It hasn't made it over to the Senate side, but that doesn't mean that you can't talk to your senator about why this matters to you and why it should matter to them. It'll be a little bit longer before the bill comes to them and they get to vote on it, but I think it's still important for you to talk to these folks, get to know them, share your concerns and your thoughts. There's no reason why you can't do that today. So page cards in the back. If you don't know your lawmaker, you can stick around and we'll help you look that up. I'll have a couple of volunteers around with laptops. All you need is your home address. That is what even if you aren't registered to vote in this state, maybe you're a student and you're registered to vote somewhere else, Maybe you're not 18 yet and you're not registered to vote at all. You are still a constituent of the representatives who represent the district where you reside. So it is where your residence is. That is what matters here. And so students or other folks who aren't registered are still constituents and still get to demand that their lawmakers represent their interests. So stick around and you can come to the front of the room and we'll get that information for you if you need it. We'll also be around if you've got any questions, take lots of handouts, and thank you all so much for coming. We are so grateful for your support, and we've got something back.
Can I say something really quickly?
Sure.
Hold on one second. Just wanted to, sometimes this issue of raised age, I'm Marissa Dotson, I'm the Public Policy Director at the Southern Center. I just wanted to quickly highlight for you all some of the confusion around raised age that happens, just in case you're asked. So a lot of lawmakers have no idea really what we're trying to do here. They hear this and they think it's this other kind of thing. So sometimes you'll get questions like, so what, you mean like the kids who murder people or the kids who rape, and they give you the most severe, heinous crime, and sometimes we're caught off guard by that question. This bill does not address that. This is not about the serious violent felonies. That's something for another day. I would suggest that those kids shouldn't be charged as adults either, but that's a fight for another day. Just remind the legislator that those offenses are not included. We're talking about things like shoplifting, marijuana possession, things
Schoolyard fights is another good, because remember, 17-year-olds are still in school. So yeah, those are the things we're talking about. Thank you so much. That is something you might get is this sort of the most severe crime they can think of. We hear that a lot. You'll hear that in hearings. Those are not the kids we are talking about when we talk about raising the age. We're talking about the vast majority of 17-year-olds who commit misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies. Good? Pamela.
Hi, Pamela Perkins-Carr, Mass Incarceration Georgia Network. To follow up on that, this is HB 440, not SB 440. This is HB 440, House Bill 440, not SB 440.
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, if you've got any questions, we'll stick around for a little bit. We do have to be out of the room by 11. Thank you all so much for your time today, and go off and good luck.